for research in the STEM faculty, and a chartered architect. She's done lots and lots of work on inclusive design and participation and collaboration in design. And we're really delighted to invite her to talk today, and hope the recording succeeds, because then it will be available to many more people. So yeah, I shall introduce Rachel, and I know she wants this quite as a fairly informal discussion, so I'm sure she won't mind if at any point you ask a question, or you can either put it in the chat, or you know, even raise your hand, and we'll keep an eye on that. Okay, over to you, Rachel.
Okay, yeah, you say, you know, invited me along to this. I was actually really pleased to get the opportunity to meet some students, to talk to people about this work. And as Georgie was saying, really at any point in this presentation, the idea is to open it up so it becomes more of a conversation. Certainly in the initial briefing that Nick was giving, she was saying what really works well is students want to be involved, that opportunity to add your experience, things that are going on in your work or whatever that may relate to this, for us to be able to share and discuss those things. I did think about sharing some papers before this event, which would have seemed more like homework or background reading. And that didn't seem quite fair, because in a way what I'm going to do in this presentation is build on those papers quite a lot for this, for the sequence of how things unfold. But the idea is I've put a link to those papers up in the chat box, or certainly through Nick, Georgie, and I, we can share those if you're interested more in this presentation and the work behind it. I'm going to share my screen so we can actually see the formal. Oh dear, hold on a minute. Does that look about right?
Yeah, we can see that, Rachel. That's fine.
Okay. So the title of the invitation to talk, the title of this presentation is what makes participation in design participatory design. And really within this, what I wanted to be able to do was talk about experience that I've had working in practice, working as an architect in practice, on social housing projects in Hackney, before Hackney was hip, where we were working with tenants groups and having their involvement in the design of projects. And some of those experiences at that point in time, we'd be in a tenants working group and somebody would come up to me and they'd say, I used to box with the Crays. So it was this level of conversation with people who are living on housing projects. As architects, we were delighted to have the approval of that person to be working on that particular project, because they were like the guardian of the estate. So as long as the people who were working on their particular estate had the approval of that guy, we were safe. So there's sort of practical experience of working on housing projects, as well as carrying these ideas, enthusiasm for the different ways that people work on design projects through into academia, into different forms of research. So in this presentation, I'll talk a little bit about some research projects, a little bit about my PhD and some other papers that are through that. But what I'd really like is at any point in time, people to raise questions, say how that relates to what what's going on in your jobs, so we can reflect a broader spectrum of areas of design practice in this conversation about participation in design. So one of the things we might want to think about is, what is it that makes this one particular form of design, participatory design. How is this different from inclusive design, design for people with disabilities, and how they might become involved in design processes? And some of the earlier work that I've been involved in has fed through to changes in accessibility legislation, the building regulations, informing government practices in these areas. So this is formed from a more general interest in how people in their daily lives, their daily experiences can become involved in design. So I'm wondering, yep, that changes it. So this actual presentation, the form of this presentation and these images partly come from a piece of work or a presentation I gave in Brooklyn a couple of years ago, which was with an invitation from Henry Sanoff to come and talk at an intensive that he was running about democratic design without borders. And there's also these other couple of papers which are nicer written, better written, and have particular references to other people's research. One in particular that this is based on, which is about how participatory design has informed architectural practice. So I just wanted to open it up and ask, does anyone recognise any of these images, the two images that I've seen? Does that look familiar? I can't see whether anyone's written anything in the chat. Georgie, are you able to see whether...
There's nothing in the chat at the moment. Maybe we're all a bit too young for
too young. Oh, may well
to
be.
know about.
So these images, which I love, you know, are part of reflect back on a period of time and a sort of self-initiated development called Drop City, which happened in Colorado, just outside in America. And it was a commune where people were using improvised bits of materials and things, obviously heavily inspired by Buckminster Fuller, geodesic domes, and were building this commune themselves and taking their own values, their own initiatives to be able to design their own place, their own inhabitable place. And that commune ran from 1965 to 1973. I think there's a film that's been made about it, certainly a book, but it's one of these well-known sort of inspirational instances of participation in design, community-led collaborative design with Drop City. And so you'll see in several of these slides, I try and use those images when I can. So what happened was I was invited by Henry to come out to talk about some work in Brooklyn a few years ago. And really this was partly inspired by trying to produce a special trying to produce a special issue on participatory design. And so seed for this idea was some of the previous issues that Henry Sanoff had produced himself, and then doing background reading and homework on this. There's this wonderful early Design Research Society conference, which Nigel Cross, who was at the OU, was pulling together in 1971. And in the introduction, it says the phrase design participation, which I thought I invented specifically for the title of the conference, has become, according to one reviewer, an adequate cliche. And then it goes on and it says Rainier Banham, who was a very, how do we say, gregarious architectural critic, he would characterize different things, and he's saying in Donald Jones' terms, it's one of those ideas in good currency and therefore dead, overused and therefore dead. Everybody's heard about it. Everyone can discuss it. Everybody knows what it means. It's reached the point where it becomes susceptible to government and therefore has ceased to be a live issue. So something even at the foundation, at the time when people started writing and talking about these things, some other people were saying this isn't an entirely novel, an entirely new idea. So going on a bit further, Rainier and Banham, talking at the Architectural Association, said, this past summer at Alvin Borowski's summer session at the Architectural in London, all the radicals and Maoists were going along to hear what was clearly going to be an extra groovy talk, because it was about something in Japan as well as about something in participation. So already there was this bit of a buzz at that point in time about what participation in design might mean, but as yet we haven't really looked at what it means or how it might be defined. So when I was starting to pull together this special issue, I went along to one of the conferences, Participatory Design conferences in 2016 at Aarhus University. And at the conference, I was talking to somebody from Carnegie Mellon University. And I kind of, in the back of my mind, thought that other people might be talking about Henry Sanoff's work on participatory design and communication in community architecture. And other people anticipated different kinds of research, more of the American pragmatist roots of civil rights movement. And the conference was absolutely exceptional, but already we were beginning to still sense this disparity about whether people really had the same conceptions of understanding what people might mean by participatory design. And at this conference and in one of the other papers, Rachel Charlotte Smith, who's at Aarhus University, just makes the comments that the paradox seems to be that there's more acceptance of participatory design, and it's become part of a general design discourse, the meaning of participation itself has become diluted. So what I started to do here was look at the PDC Participatory Design Conference, which is mainly sort of an IT-based community conference, to look at their definitions of what they understand to be about core concepts and characteristics. And Daria Loy, who's and Greenbaum, who's certainly sort of prolific in this area, end up have written some nice papers sort of summarising and reviewing the histories, and they arrive at these particular characteristics which they think define what makes something participatory design, heavily influenced by Scandinavia in the 1970s. So an aim here is about equalising power relations between people who may be professional designers from other people who may be participants in design processes, but they're looking to remove those power imbalances in any of those interactions whenever possible. They're also acknowledging that the actions of participatory design take place in particular situated contexts. So it's not like we can develop a generic method or some kind of boilerplate that we move from one project to the next. So I'm thinking of the work that Nick Georgie and Derek have been doing, funded by British Council, where they've been to different parts in South America and have been working with people in particular situations, in particular contexts. And the solutions and ways of working that might be appropriate on one project won't necessarily be the same for the next. So it has to be this real-time, real-life working with people, which is a characteristic of this collaborative way of working. They're also talking about mutual learning, the idea that although we might be designers of some form or another, that we actually learn from everybody who we're working with in part of these exchanges and collaborations that go on. So this is nice. This is some form of reciprocity and learning that's taking place. They also think a characteristic of this is that there are tools and techniques. So I'm not using the term method, but there are things which might be developed for concrete interactions in particular situations to express needs and visions. And this is, we might refer to this as the infrastructuring of the ways we go about infrastructuring particular kind of events. The next one's kind of interesting because I think this, to me, just signals that it's the IT community that's coming from, where they're talking about alternative visions of technology. So in a broad sense, a technology doesn't have to be IT, paper and pen are other forms of technologies. They're, low-tech technologies. But this notion that there's some technology that actually changes in the home, workplace, which is part of this participatory design exercise. And then the other part, the other characteristic which we're acknowledging is that these are democratic practices. This is about values of social design and ideas of equality and the representation of others. So this was nice at the time of trying to pull together a special issue, to see these sort of clearly defined from one of the fields which applies participatory design, of them being very specific about what they think are the characteristics that make something participation in design, a form of participatory design. So this is an extract from one of the papers, and this probably says more clearly what we might mean, or the different areas. So IT, workplace technology, architecture, community architecture, international development and disaster relief. These are all the fields which might be applying different participatory design approaches in different ways into there. What also came through nicely at that PDC conference in 2016 was when people started to be talking about pluralism and a plural voice, about it isn't just solely from a Western perspective that we want to be approaching participatory design. And certainly in conversation with the person from Carnegie Mellon, would say participatory design takes a very different form in countries that don't have a welfare state and values of social democracy. So for us, this nicely fits with this vision of socio-democratic values for a common good, for a better society. And this is what underscores PD. So in the editorial paper for one of the special issues, there are certainly references to other reviews of the field of participatory design, and if anyone's interested, we can share copies of that paper, or if anyone wants to discuss them in more depth, I'll gladly talk about this. So at the time I was trying to pull together this special issue a couple of years ago, I got the chance to meet this guy here. So does anybody know who this person is in this picture? Georgie? Nobody knows.
Yes, I do. Of course it is Henry Sanoff.
Yeah.
But I'm old.
Old. So he's a friend, and I was trying to get him to come along today, and he got somebody else that was coming over at this time. Otherwise, he would have joined us this evening. He'd love to come along and join and have a chat. And so when was it? It was a few years ago. I can't remember how I got to know that he was going to be in the UK, that he was going to be in Glasgow. And I just thought it was worth a train ticket to go and meet him. So this is somebody that I'd written a paper for one of his special issues of the journal Design Studies, I don't know, in about 2007, 2003 or something, but we'd never actually met in person. And we just sat for I don't know how many hours out in the sun, glorious day, as you can see, outside, just drinking coffee and water and things. And he was just telling me stories about the past, and about mutual friends, people we knew. So it was really nice to talk about him. But from my perspective, this is the person I consider, or I always look to, as being one of the pioneers, one of the originators in the field of participatory design. And I've just shared on that slide one of the definitions I kind of align with when we start to talk about participatory design, that it's about participatory design is about an attitude for a force of change in the creation and management environments of people. And I like the fact that it acknowledges that it cuts across professional boundaries and culture and cultures, and its roots lie in the ideals of participatory democracy. So this is acknowledging its kind of politics with a small or a large p, about the mutual learning, the equal power relations, which were acknowledged in the other definition from the ICT research. And here he's putting a particular method, a research method, and saying that participatory design is underscored by the practical approach of participatory action research. So it's starting this conversation, this realization that this is about a form of research, a form of practical interaction, and it's a form of exploratory learning, which is, for us as designers, as well as people who may be new and novice to design processes. And what Henry was able to do was tell me the story, almost the story of his career. So I knew that he worked at one point in time in UCB, University of California, Berkeley. And I just asked him about some of the things, movements that were happening on Telegraph Avenue, and I just said, Henry, this must have been great being there at that point in time. And he'd kind of correct me and say, actually, that change and drive for initiative wasn't happening within the faculty at Berkeley. It was happening on the streets, and the students.
In the chat.
You okay?
Still, Jackie's typing. Can I ask a question?
Absolutely. Yeah, go for it, Thomas.
So what I would like to know is that, so this block is, one part is about doing research, and I was wondering that for the service, what kind of evidence shall I include that I did this research, like websites, or I'm just wondering, like, what would you like to see?
Yeah, because you're not exactly going to be able to be outside. I think what gets you a good mark is if you show a real variety of research. So if you looked at...
Sounds as if we've got another meeting patched into ours. I don't know how that's happened. Oh, I know. Someone said that they were watching a tutorial at the same time, didn't they?
Yeah. Gareth had a... Yes.
Okay. I'd gladly take any questions. So I was really telling Henry's story here, which was about what was happening at UCB, University of California, Berkeley. And so he went there as a young academic, and was tasked with writing
a creator board game around, and absolutely that's a service. So
Gareth, could you unmute? Could you mute yourself, please?
For 2 years.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Do you mean in your research?
Gareth.
Well, could you? Yeah, I suppose you could show.
If I talk as well, will they hear me?
I'm not too sure, but I'll try to mute Gareth in the moment something comes in. I'll try. Let's see. Go ahead.
Okay. The point being on this slide is that when Henry was a young member of faculty, the students were the same people that were out on the streets in Berkeley and on Telegraph Avenue, wanting to change society, wanting to reform society. And they were actually probing faculty and asking, what's the relevance of our courses? You know, what are the great issues of our time? And they were quite nicely kind of challenging what they were being taught. So Henry, along with John Chris Jones at that point in time, were early in their career, and they were developing these first courses, which now for us might be the reason why we look to UCB as sort of inspirational places and sort of progressive place of learning. But it was really nice to meet Henry, because I began to get the sense that he was kind of where the action was happening, or even part of the movement for these actions and things, these changes. And the quote at the bottom is from one of the civil rights people, talking about architecture, and is saying, as a profession, you've not particularly distinguished yourself by your social and civic contribution to the course of civil rights. So there was some heavy duty kind of criticisms being loaded at architecture and the way forms of education were taking at that point in time. And Henry was certainly one of these pioneers, and Radical was really looking to introduce some form of change through that. I don't know, Georgie probably knows, recognises some of these. There's a whole series of books and papers that Henry's produced. The one at the bottom left was something, I think it's out of print at the moment, was something that certainly influenced what I was doing in master's and PhD studies. It was, you know, very much looking at design games. He was developing a kind of a slide to sort of visualize a streetscape, and developing ways, so visual ways, so that people who weren't designers could actually work and begin to discuss and converse with what the appearance of a streetscape might be. So those are some of the lovely work that he's done. This guy, we've got his name there, so we can see it's John Habrack, but there's a list of other people, Yona Friedman, who's a friend of Henry's, Lucian Kroll, Herman Hertzberger, Bernard Rudofsky, Architecture Without Architects, Walter Seagal, who designed the housing, which is in Lewisham, which is the self-built homes and things. So there was this, you know, sort of groundswell of folk on similar lines of thinking, and you know, they're partly thinking about people's involvement in design processes, also processes of making and self-build, like Drop City, but a little more stable. And they were really acknowledging this improvisation in design, that we might design something, but it doesn't stay fixed and constant throughout its life cycle. You know, there's these forms of ad hocism, and the fact, acknowledging that things inevitably change through their use. So some of these values and concepts that we now might accept about how we look at the world and how we conceive what we're doing, it's, you know, these are only 50 or so years old, that you know, it's nice that we can still reference, and some of these people are still alive, that were instrumental in making this happen. So that's a quick kind of sketch through some of the idealism of the 1960s through to how things were changing through the 1970s. We roll it on to the 1980s and 90s. There was a different political environment. So in the UK, there were, while there had been a community architecture group at the RIBA and a women's architecture group, we had a change in presidency, you know, revolves every few years, and then there was, you know, people that are able to say, you know, community architecture was not, isn't, you know, declaring it dead. It wasn't simply killed; it was overkilled. So very much a different ethos, and disbanding these structures and support that were in place for community projects to take place. There were some architects, though, that carried on. irrespective of massive reductions in government funding. So there were community aid centres. GLC was still around for some of that time. Then the example here, there was the Matrix architectural co-op, drawing attention to particular aspects of design. And what I've phrased these as are the more resilient architectural practices. So there are a few sort of key books that are produced by Matrix about women in a man-made environment. And these I'd worked with Levitt Bernstein and other practices, some of these practices that were still looking at social housing issues and different opportunities were available to people to be able to participate in the design of environments. So this is an example. This is about the time when I was doing my PhD. So the project on the right is Grenville, which is in Camden or Camden Borders, and this was one of the projects I was able to see through the different processes. So I was working alongside the architects, and Glasshouse were involved. And the picture at the top left is when we went on a study trip. So this was a study trip with residents or future residents of this housing estate, and we went to the Netherlands. There were particular developments in, I think it was Rotterdam at that point in time, very innovative forms of social housing which were being built. So this was about us learning as a group together through visiting different projects to build a bit of a vocabulary, to express opinions about what we liked and what might be the characteristics of things on different projects. So at the bottom right, there's a reference to a paper. It was published in Building Research and Information. And that draws on some of these conversations and some of these instances that happened in our sort of design events and workshops with this community group. There was a delightful incident that happened in one meeting where we were looking at different brick samples that we had physical bricks in front of us. We had CAD drawings of a wall of a building. And what we were really getting the sense of was that the CAD drawing and the physical bricks couldn't really represent what it might be to look at the wall that you can see on the right. It's mixing these colours, and when you're looking at one-to-one lifestyle samples or CAD drawings, it's very difficult to visualise what it's going to be. And what happened in this meeting, during the meeting, somebody just kind of stepped up and took down the CAD drawing from the wall and just said, I'm taking this down because it doesn't show, we can't read what it's going to look like. So on one hand, everyone talks with a very positive sense about how workshops always go and participation in design. What was nice was the interruption and disruption in that kind of event, and the agency, and there was some aspect of mutual learning between the architects and the group of future inhabitants, because they felt enabled to be able to do that. And they said to the architects, look, come back next week and show us in a better way what this is going to look like. So I think quite often you'll read papers about, oh, this worked really well on a project. This worked phenomenally well, but it worked phenomenally well because that group felt empowered to say, we don't understand what you're doing. Have a rethink of this and bring us something new back next week. So we've talked about the pioneers, we've talked about the difficult times and the resilient architects. The last kind of characterisation of way architects have been working in this I've just called, new progressive architectural practices. Actually, some of them are older. So, the book on the left is contemporaries of mind who took a particular form of feminist practice of how they do their work. And so, does anyone? I'm talking to Georgie again. Georgie, do you know who the group are on the right? Or does anyone else know who that group of people are hanging on this building frame, timber building frame? No? Okay, shall I say?
Go on, tell us. I know I should know, and honestly, I can't remember.
These were Turner Prize winners. This is Assemble. So these are today's groovy young things that really take this step beyond just viewing design as some passive exercise of, producing a drawing and things, and actually go out there and build things themselves. But they were, unusual as Turner Prize winners probably about 2 or 3 years ago now. So in one of the papers, it tries to talk about these people who are really moving from design research or participatory design as just some kind of discursive workshop exercise into the realm of sort of actually making things about this form of action research. And some of these things actually have a resonance with Stuart Brand, people from the 1960s who are putting forward these ideas of loose fit and things, and really nice that they're kind of taking form now in the 21st century. And then here I just wanted to throw in an academic term, but also sort of unpack it so it's clear. Epistemics is about how we construct new knowledge, or how we learn about new things through making things. And what's nice is it's this sense of betweenness of how we're actually involved in doing things with our hands and negotiating different things, that it's enabling all of us who are involved in design processes to be part of constructing this new knowledge. And this last slide is just about showing another workshop here. So this is somebody at Hook Park, a structural engineer, working through these scale kind of mock-ups of different forms of structures and pavilions that they want to develop. But the idea that it's through this process of making and prototyping and experimenting with the properties of different materials, which is also part of this participation in design processes. The idea that instead of it being something where we're anticipating use before use just by drawing some representation, we're sort of working with some of the values of some of the ideas in PD, that there's this mutual exchange of knowledge and new knowledge is constructed. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm going to, and there are some references, so I can refer people to other things at a later stage at any time. If anyone's interested, I'd certainly gladly talk about this, but I'm going to end the show and then just try and find the right screen. Oh, no idea where this has gone, Georgie.
I think you just need to end.
There's your shared window. Can you? What can you
go back to Teams and then stop sharing?
Yeah,
that's the easiest. Just press the cross on top next to leave.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Can you? It'd be really nice to see some faces if everyone could just put their video cameras on just to wave and say hello. So yeah. I've been talking to a screen. I want to see the people. So how much of that was completely obvious and something you knew about, or how much of it was seemed relevant? This is where, it's
I thought that was such a lovely talk, Rachel. Obviously, I know quite a bit about participatory design already because my PhD has sort of been looking at it, but it's just so nice to hear more about it. And I don't know, I don't know as much about it from the architectural perspective, actually. It's more kind of computing. So thank you. And it's really nice to touch on the more making stuff at the end, because I've been talking more about participatory making in my work, which Cliff and Hoylerud talk about, who are textile researchers. So yeah, thank you.
Emily, it's lovely to see you and congratulations.
Oh, thank you. I'm about to resubmit really soon, so that's good. Are you saying congrats about the baby or the thesis?
Well, I was thinking I was going to say double congratulations, but then so I didn't know there was a resubmit part there. So yeah, okay, yeah. I mean, this was the interesting thing when I started doing this. You'd think after you've been talking and reading around the subject for quite a few years, you'd fully understand it. And then you go along to a different conference, you lens and take on this. You know, it genuinely is kind of so you're still recording. Okay, I was going to say, I think that was why Marianne wouldn't let me be your examiner, was because of the some of the politics and power things which come through those definitions of PD that she's a bit scared I might bring up.
Oh, but I think it's so interesting. It's so important to have a dialogue around it, actually, you know. So yeah, it's good. But we should have more chats about it anyway.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. When's the resubmission?
So I'm waiting for my other half to just do the bit of the formatting, just to make it all pretty again after I've been doing all the corrections. I say all of them, it wasn't that bad, it was minor corrections, but it takes so much longer when you've got second kiddie. So, you know, but my deadline isn't until end of next month, actually, but I want to get it in this month. So that'd be
yeah. So please, somebody else tell me about what you're doing on U111 or any of the other modules at the moment. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna choose a name. This is terrible. Mark. What are you working on at the moment?
Hi. Taking photos of my hand. Actually,
the same art.
I just started. Seems kind of basic, but yeah, I think it's for designing a t-shirt.
Yeah. So you've just, that's U11, isn't it? U101.
U101.
Yeah.
It's literally only been started about 3 weeks, hasn't it? So you just started.
Yeah.
I think we're
it's all right, that's good.
Week 6. Well, coming up to week 6 on Monday.
I can't see who's talking. I'm looking around and now I'm completely confused.
I think that was Martin.
Yeah. Yeah. So these academic notions of participation in design or other things, how does that come across? Are these just abstract labels for something, or, you know, is this academics just focusing on things in yeah. Martin, how does it come across? Does it sound like it has any practical relevance, or?
Yeah, it does. I think it's quite early days at the moment for me anyway, in where we are at the moment. But the route I'm going down, you see, is what I want to design camper vans or leisure vehicles. So obviously that involves numerous kind of people. So yeah, the relevance is there.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you, Rachel, can I ask, how do you build a rapport with the people that you've worked with? What do you think are the things that have helped you to kind of make the connections that have then helped you to work with one another?
That's a good question. I suppose one of the things I'd say is kind of over time, that it certainly gets better over time. But then how do you get that initial connection? There has to be some serendipitous opportunity to be involved. And when you're involved in groups, always there's somebody you might speak to begin with, and you don't know how that connects you into the group. That's just one person. And then, so you might have, made one friend and made other enemies by, who knows, in those group processes. So you're always kind of working with that kind of group dynamics and things. I must admit, most of the time I was quite kind of shy and quiet. And somehow, somehow it works through. Different things at different point in times. If those are projects I was working on, you've then got a work responsibility. As a researcher, I'd be involved as a participant observer. So I'd probably be itching to say something about what was going on in the design, and then I just have to sit in the meeting and stay completely quiet. So I think there's different aspects of group processes in there, but also different roles depending on how you're doing, what you're doing in that. So I'm looking at some other people. So I don't mean to. Matilda, tell me what you're working on in the in the real world.
Do you mean on the course, or you mean the real world? Or
I mean the real world. I've forgotten what that's like.
Oh, right, okay. Well, I'm not working at the moment, so sorry, you probably picked the wrong person. I'm part-time studying and part-time looking after my mum, and I'm part-time recovering from illness. So that's kind of my world, that's my real world.
What do you aspire to do, or when we're all through this, whenever that is, how's this course, or how's this going to help to get onto something?
I agree with Martin. It feels like very early days. It almost feels like we're just trying things out, which I think is kind of the point of the first few weeks of the course. It's like you're almost just like playing with things and experimenting. And like the first TMA was very kind of, well, for me anyway, Hippo got it right. It was very playful and just like being creative, which I really like. I think it'll be really interesting to kind of tie everything together, because I feel like at the moment I'm learning lots of things. Like I started researching a lot more different things online and actually like noticing design. Obviously I'm not getting out in the world at the moment, but just kind of like like looking at photos and things and like really noticing how things are designed, which I never did before. So for me that's been like the most interesting thing, I think, is just a different perspective. And even sort of thinking like everything I see around me is designed. I've never really thought in those terms before, so it's been quite a revelation. And I suppose, kind of moving on from that, it will be, I'm really looking forward to the bit where you kind of start to design. I think it's block 2 and 3 sort of onwards, where you design for community and then sort of for the, not exactly for the world, but the wider community. I think that's like I think that was the bit of your lecture I found sort of really interesting. That application is kind of thinking about how design, impacts everyone, actually, people. So the participatory thing, I suppose it is quite out there, but then it's also kind of part of what we're going to be doing, because at some stage I understand that we collaborate on projects, and so I think it is all really relevant, even though obviously what you're kind of on a different level in some ways, but it's all kind of ties in, I reckon. Thank you.
Well, welcome. I'm really I'm really pleased to hear what you want to be doing on the course, but also how it might help, because I think it's genuinely more of an understanding that the design has an influence and an impact in the world, not just in the design of objects. So this is where with the design and innovation qualification, about being able to do, to influence sort of change in a broader sense. People will even talk about, design of systems, design of services and other things. So it's a nice stage to get that breadth of understanding. The idea here is it isn't just talking about architectural practice. That was just one part here. I see somebody has got their hand up, and I don't know who.
Oh, sorry, it's me. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Hello, it's Alex. It's just a little heads up for the people that have just started U101. I'm a bit further on because I was started with the October cohort. So we have done participatory design. It's challenging under COVID situations because we can't really participate with many people physically, but you know, you can do Zoom meetings, etc. So it's this will become more and more relevant as you go on. And the other thing I wanted to address to Rachel was I found your talk very interesting because I'm passionate about co-housing as a topic, and I think that participatory design within architecture is going to become more and more prevalent in this country, because I think co-housing is going to become really, I hope, a very mainstream way of working, with the you know, with places like Lilac being so successful in Sheffield, and there seems to be a huge groundswell. I attended a few meetings last week online with Scotland. I can't remember the name of it now, but they had an online summit with lots and lots of meetings on co-housing, and both from a statutory and you know, individual point of view. I think lots of people are really interested in it, so I'm hoping that it's going to become a big thing.
Gladly carry on the conversation about that and take that forward in some way if you want to drop me an email.
Oh, that would be brilliant. Yes, because it's something I'd really like to do. And I think particularly as we have an aging population, I think co-housing, because I used to work also in public health, and I think co-housing is a real solution for an aging population. For a healthy aging population.
And I'm looking at Max and saying yes, and an accessible housing as well.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
We don't want any steps in there. Okay.
Hi.
I can't see. I don't know where I'm.
No, you won't be able to see me. I don't have my camera on.
Yeah. And you're called guest as well, so maybe
just say hello and shout a name out.
I'm Ruth. I have like a couple of questions. My interest, like as a student, I was doing T218 last year, and doing web technologies this year, and I'm very interested in inclusive design and accessible design. But this actually, my question is more related to what's going on with me at the moment, because at the moment I don't have anywhere to live, and I've been looking for places to live for quite a few months, which has been a bit of a crazy, trying to study, trying to find somewhere to stay in a pandemic. And a lot of the issues for me have been about accessibility and about discrimination in housing. And so my question really is around who is funding these types of participatory approaches and why? Because so much of housing all the time just seems to, like, it's been a bit of a baptism by fire, discovering how much blocks are put in front of you all the time, you know, to just layer up the kind of discrimination, to layer up the kind of difficulties in accessing housing. And so it's amazing to hear like projects like this, but like, who's doing these? Why are they funding them? And why is so much of the kind of housing setup just set up to like leave people looking for like struggling to find somewhere to live?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot in there, and this is where I didn't know whether you meant sort of buying new housing, you know, as in the characteristic kind of generic developments, larger developments that we can see in many places, you know, certainly Milton Keynes and other places.
It's absolutely brilliant because it really, really motivates people, and even if you look at social media just now, everyone is.
I've lost, somebody's just dropped out, I think.
No, that was me muting Gareth.
Oh, no. We talk about somebody. Okay, yeah.
So it's in general, like like obviously, I mean, I'm looking for somewhere to rent, but obviously people like, you can't rent or buy or anything houses that don't exist, but also the whole attitude within the kind of business side of housing just seems to be so focused on money. and like they don't want people like me. They don't want people who are not well or who claim benefits, or and so I guess what I'm asking is, like, where is the momentum coming from for movements like participatory design that actually think about building in the context of who actually needs it, rather than how much money can be made, and how can we make more of that happen?
So I agree, and I think there are. And so I think it's driven by people's sort of practitioners' own values, isn't it? Their own social values as to what they consider that there are some practices that have always worked in this way, despite what you might say an adversarial sort of environment. It hasn't been to their advantage to work in that way, but there's certainly been so that's sort of more that's potentially more of a housing studies question. So I'm almost looking at Georgie, because Georgie would know from geography that those kind of pressures as to what gets built, which is tied up with a kind of design agenda, but as often as designers, you're not having the leverage or the ways of influencing those financial constraints which are affecting what gets built. There's a whole kind of mechanism, isn't there, around local planning authorities, what they'll allow to be built. You might almost say sort of monopolies of some major developments and developers, and that's why developments can look the same in one part of the country as another, just because it's a boilerplate stamp that's put in different places. I don't know how to. I want to help. I don't know how to answer that question to be able to help practically, but there are. No, Nick's got an answer. Thank you.
It's not so much about practical help. It's just, it sounds amazing, but like,
politics behind it.
they're kind of out there, and let's help and find something.
I mean, maybe I can come in. So what I've been reading about and hearing and listening and taking part in so far, mainly I either came from communities of practice, like people that have common needs, like, for example, an example I just read about was a LGBTQ community in London, I think in North London, or was it, sorry, who kind of, they've been pushed out of the spaces they inhabited, mainly due to gentrification. So big businesses coming in, or unaffordable housing taking over spaces, and they actually did a crowdfunding campaign in order to fund a co-design process. So they're looking for architects now that could lead them through such a process. But some of the projects are research funded, so you will find calls for funding that is a mix of research funding, sometimes a knowledge exchange projects, but they're more kind of explorative, experimental often, but sometimes they actually do really lead to something built, so not necessarily only for new knowledge generation. But I have the feeling that's often by different communities, things that you like to do with others, or that you need to do with others, or where you have a commonality of interest or practice, when they overlap and come together to decide that they would like to co-design, or have the means, meet other kind of designers that are in a similar vein as Rachel's just said, that are actually considering co-designing as part of their practice, and they're growing numbers of architects like that and architectural firms. So I think it's often overlap of interests, and especially driven by different communities of practice, I find.
I can't see who's.
That's Carl, I think, but someone else had a who was first? I don't know.
Matilda.
Yeah, Matilda, maybe.
Is that a legacy hand? No.
Hello. So I'm not sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, the mute thing went a bit funny. It told me it wasn't working. I just wanted to say quickly, because I had a network issue, I didn't catch the first part of your talk. Is there any way that you can put the slides up in the U101 forum, please, to kind of just review the bits that I missed?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're recording that, so we'll put the link to the recording. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, I'd really like, so I was just going to say, I really like to watch the bit that I missed to kind of make sense of it all.
Sure.
Thank you.
There's another hand, and I've got no idea who it is. I'm just seeing plus.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. I just wanted to ask you about your participatory design process. In the respect of you're getting lots of input and you're working with people. I'm just wondering whereabouts you whereabouts you step back from their help to actually move the design forward, because there are going to be so many voices.
Yeah.
Could you expand upon that?
Yes. So in a way, getting involved in projects, and what I've done this evening, if you like, is talk about some of the history of the movement as a whole, as well as individual projects. So I think each project ends up being different. That is one of the sort of characteristics of something. It's something we're giving a group name, but actually they end up being kind of relatively unique. And there's also an evolution of some of the things that we were doing perhaps 20 or so years ago, where we were heavily dependent on, sort of drawings and sort of low-tech equipment might not be the way we do it now. I've found, so some of the workshops I was trying to facilitate, but then also trying to record and collect data from, research data from, was just about letting the group talk. So it's it's almost like the part about just trying to step away and listen. Like this evening, it's wrong in some respects that you end up having somebody being the speaker who gives this knowledge and passes it on to people. Well, in fact, it's more through the discussion and sharing of that. So sometimes it's about providing a bit of a seed of an information to understand something, and then just trying to step away and let other people discuss it. That's a bit abstract. If I try and give an example, so the Granville housing project outside Camden, I was delighted working on that, because at that point in time, when are we going back? 2005, probably. People would talk about sustainability and design, and you'd wonder what on earth they were doing. And what would happen on that project in the workshops? There might be somebody, can't remember the name of the consultants, somebody coming and talking, and they'd be explaining about shared communal heating processes. So for people who'd lived on housing estates in London, they were absolutely terrified by the idea of having one central boiler, because they can remember the disasters that used to happen on the estates through the 1960s and 70s, where the boiler wouldn't work, and it would take the council who'd be responsible for that, quite a long time during winter to get things replaced. So how then do you work with a group talking about shared, local heating initiatives, and try and persuade them that this might be a design characteristic that they might want to adopt? So I was seeing some people giving very visual, clear examples of one house, two house, three house. This house has got the windows open. This house has been left empty all day, as to advantages to the system. And then the person just delightfully just sort of stepped away for the whole of this group to start recounting the whole of the issues of what they'd had in the past. So if it works well, it is about this proper mutual learning, not about somebody saying, oh, you should have grey water systems, oh, they're good for the environment, this is what you should be having on projects. And I was massively impressed by the the tact and almost the kind of humility of those designers just to step away, because it didn't used to be like that in the bad old days. You know, people used to go in with a particular view about how things were going to be, and that was and there wasn't that opportunity for that conversation. But for those workshops to really work well was about this kind of loose fit approach, where they're doing something, there's some structure, there's some kind of infrastructure there, but you've also got to kind of go with the flow of what happens in that event. And another example I can think of, I mean, because there was hours and hours of data, and I spent a lot of time on that particular project that was built in Camden. I absolutely loved that group and what they were saying. So there were other situations where somebody found a problem in the scheme that the architect hadn't seen. You know, the architects were trying to say, look, if we put the house this way, we have the glazing here, it's then going to be secure and safe because there'll be glazing. And then if people are walking on the staircase, you know, people on the public realm, in the public street, will be able to see you. So there isn't going to be a problem. Then somebody over time who got to know the architects and could be quite cheeky and amusing and all of these things, who wasn't scared or intimidated about saying things, would say, hold on a minute, that doesn't work out. If you swap the lifts and the stairs around, one of those, either the lift space, waiting outside the lift or not knowing who's coming out the lift, is going to be in shadow and not visibly, not visible. So I think that something happens through setting an exercise up, letting people run with it, and then kind of leaving the space for other people to step up. In one of the workshops, somebody decided they didn't like the drawing and they took it down, you know, and you just look across at the project architect at that point in time, and he kind of thought, fair enough. And you can see them kind of scratching their head and think, how do we get around this? But they come back the next week and the conversation carries on. So rather than it being a specific activity or something that works well, I think it's part about enabling something to happen, but then enabling the space for the group to come in and challenge all the ideas. I hope that answers some of the things. We probably isn't a full answer.
No, it's very interesting. It gives you more insight that it's a two-way conversation, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, that if somebody goes in there and as if, oh, this is, you know, this is the law, this is how it should be, that's one sure way to wind up a group. They're not going to want that.
No, thank you very much.
Welcome. Okay, I'm wondering if I can escape.
Yeah, I think it's been a really fascinating talk, Rachel. A few blasts from the past for me, but unless anyone has any burning questions, I'd just like to thank you for sharing with us. And it's brilliant to see a whole bunch of people who are just starting out on this design journey with the OU.
Well, thank you. I wanted to say thank you. Thank all of you. This has been great fun. You know, none of us get out anywhere. This is social. This is great. I can come along another time. I can try and bring some friends to tell their own stories.
Brilliant.
Henry will come another time.
Oh, I'd love that. It would be fantastic.
That would be great. He for those who don't know him, he really is considered a kind of guru of the whole participatory design thing. When I was a student studying design at the Open University, that was when I first was introduced to his stuff, and that was an incredibly long time ago.
If anyone wants to discuss any of these things, you know, if you've got insomnia, you can read some of those papers. They're nicely dry. But I'd happily talk about any of these things or come back again another time. Yep.
Yeah, if you're aware of our Facebook group, I don't know how many people here know the Facebook group. If you're a Facebook user, we've got a Design at Open Facebook group, and that's quite a good place to kind of ask questions. And if you flag up that you'd like to chat to Rachel, then I can give you details and stuff.
Yeah, I'm not a Facebook.
You're not, but I'm just saying that it's another way for people to let me know.
Yeah.
Today, like I was keeping an eye on Facebook, and a couple of people messaged me about someone wanted to come in a bit late and so on. So, you know, we do keep an eye on that chat quite regularly. It's easier than looking at every single forum, to be honest.
Yeah, this has been fun. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, we should do the applause.
Thank you.
Right, we have to do. Hang on, there's a way of doing it. Oh, what do you do? This one.
I'm going to be embarrassed on this. Yeah, I think it's been great meeting you. All right, then I'm going. Bye bye.
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 Bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
So,
If there's anything else, yeah.
Sorry, Nicole. What was the Facebook group? Was it OU Design?
Let me Design it Open. It is. Are you 101?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on the. Oh God, where would you find it? It's under resources. There's I'll post a link again. Let me see. Can I quickly? I'm sure I'll find it quickly.
Yeah,
I can see. Well, I'll send it. I get the link to you in 1 second. Just We also have a YouTube channel. Yeah, it's called Design It Open. But I give you the link. It's just a bit slow because I'm recording as well. But don't worry.
Design with
do you see the link just popped up? It's in the chat box.
I haven't found the chat yet. It's the first time I've done
that. Anyway,
where's the chat?
So when you open, sometimes you can't see it. It depends on how you get in. But are you on B presentation? Then I'll just post it. Are you on U101B 21B? Have you just started, or are you on J?
Yeah, I started in February.
Perfect. Yeah. I'll just send the link. I'll post a link tomorrow. Yeah.
Hey, brilliant. Thank you so much.
No problem. Yeah, you're welcome. Sure, no problem. Okay. Great. You could come. Thank you so much.
Oh, it was great. Thank you. Thanks for organising it. Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Stop recording.